If you worked overtime in 2025 thinking you wouldn't have to pay taxes on it, what I'm about to tell you might shock you. Millions of workers across America are opening their tax documents right now, and they're absolutely furious. They're seeing numbers that don't add up. They're realizing they were promised something that isn't quite what they thought it was. And some people are now facing unexpected tax bills because they misunderstood how this whole thing actually works. Stay with me, because I'm going to break down exactly what's happening, why people are upset, and most importantly, what you need to know before you file your taxes this year. Welcome to Benefit Vault. I'm here to help you navigate these confusing financial situations so you can protect your money and make informed decisions. Before we dive into the details of this overtime tax situation, I need you to do something really quick. Hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. This channel is all about helping you understand changes that affect your wallet, and you don't want to miss important updates like this one. It literally takes 2 seconds, and it could save you from making costly mistakes with your taxes. If you're already subscribed, thank you so much for being part of our community. Now, let's get into what's really going on with this no tax on overtime policy. When this was first announced, it sounded amazing, right? No taxes on overtime. That sounds like free money. If you're making $50 an hour and you work overtime at $75 an hour, many people thought that entire $75 would be tax-free. They thought they'd get to keep every single penny of their overtime pay without the government taking a cut. But that's not how it actually works, and that's where the confusion and anger is coming from. Here's the reality that's hitting people hard right now. Your regular hourly pay is still being taxed. Let me say that again because this is the most important thing to understand. Your base pay, your normal hourly wage, is still subject to federal income tax. What the policy actually does is exempt only the premium portion of your overtime pay from federal income tax. So, if you make $50 an hour normally, and you get time and a half for overtime, which equals $75 an hour, you're only getting a tax break on that extra $25. You still have to pay federal income tax on the base $50 per hour. And here's where it gets even more complicated. Some workers were encouraged to work double time, thinking they'd get an even bigger tax break. They picked up extra shifts on weekends and holidays, working at double their regular pay rate. But guess what? Double time doesn't qualify for this tax exemption at all. The policy only applies to time and a half pay, which is what's mandated by the Fair Labor Standards Act. If you worked double time thinking it would be tax-free, I'm sorry to tell you this, but you're going to owe taxes on all of that income. Let me share a real example with you. Someone left a comment online, and I want to read this because it perfectly illustrates what's happening to workers across the country. This person wrote, "The no tax on overtime was a complete lie, and now I am screwed. My employer allows us to work on weekends and holidays in order to get double pay, which I assumed was the same thing as overtime. But the tax professional that I met with today says it is not. Since June, I have worked 34 weekend days totaling 251 double pay hours. I have also worked 2 holidays for double pay as well, totaling 267 hours at $108 an hour. This means it's more than $28,000. I thought this was tax-free, but it is not. I have to pay taxes on all of it." Can you imagine the shock this person felt? They worked all those extra hours, sacrificed their weekends and holidays, thinking they were building up tax-free income. And now they're learning they owe taxes on all of it. That's a devastating financial surprise, and unfortunately, this person isn't alone. Thousands of workers are in similar situations right now. Now there are also caps on how much you can actually deduct. This is another detail that a lot of people didn't realize. If you're a single filer, you can only deduct up to $12,500 in overtime premium pay. If you're married filing jointly, that cap increases to $25,000. So even if you worked a ton of overtime and earned more than those amounts in premium pay, you can only claim the deduction up to those limits. Let me walk you through some concrete examples so you can see exactly how this works in practice. Let's say you make $30 an hour. Your overtime rate would be $45 an hour, which is time and a half. Now let's say you work 10 hours of overtime every single week for the entire year. That's 52 weeks, so you worked 520 hours of overtime total. At $45 an hour, that means you earn $23,400 in overtime pay. Sounds great, right? But you don't get to deduct that full amount. You only get to deduct the difference between your regular pay and your overtime pay. So that's $15 times 520 hours, which equals $7,800. That's your actual overtime deduction, not the full $23,400. Here's another example with higher wages. Let's say you make $50 an hour, so your overtime rate is $75 an hour. You work the same 520 hours of overtime for the year. That means you earned $39,000 in overtime pay. But your actual deduction is only the premium portion, which is $25 times 520 hours. That equals $13,000. Now, if you're a single filer, remember that cap of $12,500? You'd only be able to deduct $12,500, not the full $13,000. But if you're married filing jointly, you could deduct the full $13,000 because it's under the $25,000 cap. And here's something really important that I need to emphasize. This deduction is not free money. The government is not going to write you a check for $7,800 or $13,000. That's not how tax deductions work. What this means is that this amount is subtracted from your taxable income, which reduces the amount of tax you owe. The actual money you save depends on your tax bracket. If you're in the 22% tax bracket, for example, a $7,800 deduction would save you about $1,700 in taxes. That's still real money in your pocket, but it's not the same as getting $7,800 handed to you. Now let me tell you about another major problem that's causing frustration right now. The big beautiful bill, as some people called it, didn't pass until the middle of 2025. It didn't pass at the beginning of the year, and it definitely didn't pass in 2024. Because it passed so late in the year, the IRS didn't have time to update the W-2 forms that employers use to report your wages. This is causing a huge headache for everyone. Here's what's happening. On your W-2 form, there's a box, usually box 1, that shows your total wages, bonuses, and all compensation. This includes your regular pay, your overtime pay, your double time pay, everything all lumped together in one number. There's no breakdown showing how much of that total was regular pay versus overtime pay. So it's up to you to figure out how many hours of overtime you actually worked and how much overtime premium pay you earned. You need this information to claim the deduction on your tax return. This is where people are running into serious problems. Some workers are reaching out to their HR departments asking for a breakdown of their overtime hours, and they're being told they have to go back through all their pay stubs from the entire year and calculate it themselves. Imagine getting that news. You need this information to file your taxes and potentially get your refund, but your employer is telling you to dig through a year's worth of pay stubs and do the math yourself. And to make matters worse, some employers are saying they can provide copies of pay stubs sometime in February, but people need that information now so they can file their taxes as soon as possible. This is causing panic because here's the thing. A lot of people don't keep their pay stubs. Think about your own situation. How many of your pay stubs from last year do you still have? Many people get their paycheck, whether it's direct deposit or a physical check, and they throw away the pay stub. They don't think they'll need it later, or maybe they keep them for a few months and then clean out their files and toss them. Now those people are scrambling to figure out how to get that information back. Tax professionals are advising everyone to keep their pay stubs, especially the final pay stub of the year, which usually shows your year-to-date totals. That final pay stub should show how much overtime you worked for the entire year. But again, this advice is coming now, after the fact, when people have already thrown away their pay stubs from earlier in the year. If your pay stub doesn't break down regular hours versus overtime hours clearly, you need to reach out to your employer and request a statement showing your qualifying overtime hours for the year. Some employers are prepared to provide this information, but others are overwhelmed and don't have systems in place to generate these reports easily. This is creating delays and frustration all around. And remember, when you're calculating your overtime, you cannot count double time. Double time doesn't qualify. Only time and a half qualifies. So if you worked some overtime at time and a half and some at double time, you need to separate those hours and only count the time and a half hours. And even then, You're not deducting the full overtime pay. You're only deducting the premium portion, that 0.5 extra. If you made $50 an hour and worked overtime at 75, you're deducting that $25 difference per hour, not the full $75. Now here's something that might concern you, and I think it's important to address this honestly. There's a real potential for fraud with this deduction, and the IRS knows it, because employers aren't required to report overtime separately on W-2 forms. People could potentially claim more overtime than they actually worked. They could inflate their numbers, claim they worked more hours than they did, or claim double time hours as if they were time and a half hours. The IRS is aware of this issue. Now, I'm not a tax professional, so please don't take this as official tax advice, but here's what experts are saying. The IRS is currently short-staffed and backlogged. They probably won't be auditing every single overtime deduction. They don't have the manpower to go after millions and millions of workers individually. However, they will be looking at patterns. They'll be watching for industries or groups of workers where the deduction claims seem suspiciously high. If they see that everyone in a certain field is claiming the maximum deduction, or if the numbers don't match up with what's typical for that industry, they'll start asking questions. So if you're going to claim this deduction, and you absolutely should if you qualify, make sure you have documentation. Keep your pay stubs. If you don't have them, get a statement from your employer. Keep a personal log if you need to. You want to be able to prove how many overtime hours you worked if the IRS ever comes knocking. The last thing you want is to claim a deduction you can't substantiate and end up facing penalties and interest down the road. Before I continue, I want to ask you to do something that really helps this channel grow and helps more people find this important information. Hit that like button right now. When you like the video, YouTube shows it to more people who might need this information. And please, leave a comment below. Tell me, did you work overtime in 2025? Do you still have your pay stubs? Are you frustrated by this situation? Your comments not only help me understand what you're going through, but they also boost this video in the algorithm so more people can see it. And if you found this information valuable, share this video with your friends, family, or co-workers who might be dealing with the same confusion. The more people who understand this, the better. Now let's talk about something else that's causing confusion. This federal tax exemption only applies to federal income tax. It does not apply to state income tax. So if you live in a state that has income tax, and that includes states like California, New York, Illinois, and many others, you will still owe state income tax on your overtime pay. You'll also still owe Social Security and Medicare taxes on all your income, including overtime. The exemption is only for federal income tax. This is another reason why people are feeling misled. They heard no tax on overtime and assumed that meant no taxes at all. But it really means no federal income tax on the premium portion of overtime pay, assuming it's time and a half, not double time, and assuming you're under the deduction caps. That's a lot of conditions, and many people didn't realize all these limitations existed. So what does this all mean for you? How much money are you actually going to save? That depends on several factors. It depends on how much overtime you worked, what your regular hourly rate is, what tax bracket you're in, and whether you have documentation to prove your overtime hours. For some people, this deduction will save them a few $100s. For others, it might save them over $1,000. But it's probably not going to be the huge windfall that many people were expecting. Let me give you some action steps you can take right now. First, gather all your pay stubs from 2025. Go through your email if you get electronic pay stubs. Check any folders where you might have filed paper pay stubs. The more documentation you have, the better. Second, if you're missing pay stubs, contact your HR department or payroll office immediately. Request a statement showing your overtime hours for the year. Don't wait until the last minute to do this because they might be overwhelmed with requests. Third, separate your time and a half overtime from any double time you worked. Remember, double time doesn't qualify for this deduction. Fourth, calculate the premium portion of your overtime. Don't count your full overtime pay, only the extra portion above your regular rate. Fifth, make sure you're under the cap. $12,500 for single filers, $25,000 for joint filers. If you're over the cap, you can only deduct up to the cap amount. And finally, consider talking to a tax professional. I'm not a tax professional, and I don't do my own taxes for a reason. Tax law is complicated, and these new provisions make it even more complex. A good tax preparer or CPA can help you navigate this. Make sure you're claiming the deduction correctly, and potentially identify other deductions or credits you might qualify for. Yes, you'll have to pay for their services, but the money you save and the peace of mind you get knowing your taxes are done correctly is usually worth it. Now I want to address the bigger question that a lot of people are asking. Was this whole thing a lie? Were we misled? I don't think it was an intentional lie, but I do think there was a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding. When policies get announced, especially during campaigns or in political speeches, they're often simplified. The details get glossed over. People hear no tax on overtime, and they fill in the blanks with what they hope it means, rather than what it actually means. The reality is that this policy does provide a tax benefit for workers who qualify. If you worked time and a half overtime, kept your documentation, and are under the deduction caps, you will save money on your federal income taxes. That's a real benefit, but it's not as simple or as generous as many people thought it would be. The late passage of the legislation, the lack of updated W-2 forms, the confusion about what qualifies and what doesn't, all of this has created frustration and anger. I think the lesson here is that whenever you hear about a new tax benefit or policy change, you need to dig into the details. Don't just accept the headline version. Find out exactly what qualifies, what the limitations are, and what documentation you'll need. Ask questions, talk to professionals, do your research. Because as we're seeing right now, the devil is really in the details, and those details can mean the difference between a nice tax savings and a nasty surprise. As we wrap up here, I want to hear from you. Do you think this no tax on overtime policy was worth it? Or do you feel like it's caused more confusion than it's worth? Are you able to claim the deduction? Or are you one of the people who worked double time thinking it would qualify? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if you have questions, ask them. I'll do my best to point you in the right direction. Though remember, I'm not a tax professional, so for specific tax advice, please consult with a qualified CPA or tax preparer. Thank you so much for watching this entire video. The fact that you stayed until the end tells me you're serious about understanding your finances and making smart decisions with your money. That's exactly what we're all about here at Benefit Vault. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do that now. We're constantly putting out content to help you navigate financial changes, understand your benefits, and protect your hard-earned money. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and I'll see you in the next video where we'll continue helping you make the most of your money and your benefits. Until then, stay informed, ask questions, and take care of your financial future.